The sleek black Maserati hummed quietly in the shadowed garage, its glossy surface reflecting the dim golden glow of the chandeliers above. Inside, Alessandro Vercetti's sharp eyes scanned the empty estate, the silence pressing in like a suffocating velvet curtain. He had left only hours ago, telling everyone he was departing for Milan on urgent business, a fabricated trip designed to test loyalty and measure deceit. His daughter, Celestina, should have been asleep in her room, under the watchful eye of his long-trusted maid, Marietta. But the sudden metallic click of the study door caught his attention. The subtle creak wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of betrayal. Heart thudding, Alessandro ducked behind the grand staircase, his pulse racing, as the dim light revealed Marietta moving with quiet, in deliberate precision through the house. Every step, every glance over her shoulder screamed secrecy. And then he saw it, the unmistakable shimmer of Celestina's small bracelet in Marietta's hand, as if she were about to whisk the child away. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. Outside, the night was calm, the garden bathed in silver moonlight, but the mansion seemed to pulse with tension. Alessandro's breath caught as he traced Marietta's path with the precision of a predator, his mind a storm of suspicion and dread. The maid's careful movements suggested planning, and not mere play. She carried a small satchel, its contents unknown but heavy with implication. Alessandro's instincts screamed danger, a betrayal far beyond simple disobedience. His mind raced, replaying every interaction he had ever had with Marietta, the whispered warnings, the sudden changes in her tone, the furtive glances she cast toward his daughter. Nothing had felt amiss, yet now every moment seemed to shimmer with hidden threats. He clenched his fists, leather gloves creaking as he considered his options. Any sudden move could expose him, yet inaction risked losing the only person in his world he truly cared about. The house seemed to hold its breath as Marietta paused by the French doors, her silhouette framed by the faint glow of the moonlight spilling onto the polished marble floors. Celestina's small form peeked out from behind the curtain, her eyes wide and uncertain, reflecting both fear and excitement. Alessandro's heart twisted. He had always trusted Marietta to protect his daughter, to shield her from the darkness of his world. But the truth that now unfolded before him challenged every assumption he had ever made. The maid's intentions, previously hidden behind a mask of servitude and obedience, suddenly appeared as something far more dangerous. Alessandro felt the familiar tightening of his chest, the icy grip of rage laced with dread. How could she, someone he had considered family, move so deliberately toward betrayal? And why? Every scenario played through his mind, ransom, deception, manipulation, each more horrifying than the last. He moved silently along the staircase, each step calculated, his black suit blending into the shadows. He needed to see more, to understand the full scope of Marietta's plans before acting. His eyes narrowed as he observed her kneel beside Celestina, the small satchel now open. Alessandro's pulse quickened. Something about the way Marietta leaned close to his daughter felt intimate, yet chilling. A soft whisper slipped through the darkness, too quiet for Celestina to hear, but loud enough for him. "You'll be safe with me," Marietta murmured, her tone both soothing and sinister. The words struck Alessandro like a blade. Was she consoling the child or manipulating her? Every instinct in his body screamed to rush in, to seize control, yet a deeper, calculated part of him urged patience. Observation first, revelation second. The silent war within him mirrored the tension that hung thick in the air, and a prelude to a confrontation that could shatter everything. And then, in a heartbeat, Marietta turned sharply, her eyes scanning the hall as if sensing a presence. Alessandro froze, his chest tightening. She had not yet seen him, but the awareness in her movements hinted at cunning far beyond his expectations. The moment stretched, each second dripping like molten lead, every sound amplified, the faint rustle of the curtain, the echo of her heels on marble, the whisper of Celestina's soft breath. Alessandro knew that one misstep would ruin everything. One wrong move and the consequences could be fatal. The satchel, the whispered promises, the secretive gestures, all pointed to a betrayal of unimaginable scale. And as Marietta's hand hovered over the latch of the French doors, poised to step into the unknown night with his daughter, Alessandro's heart surged with a singular, unrelenting thought. He could no longer remain hidden. Every plan, every pretense of control had led to this moment. And now, as the first tendrils of confrontation began to coil around him, he realized the chilling truth. The game had begun, and he was both the hunter and the hunted. The morning sun spilled lazily across the Vercetti estate, dust motes dancing like tiny specters in the golden light. Celestina sat by the window in her silk nightgown, tracing patterns on the glass with her tiny finger. She remembered the first time she met Marietta, a frail young woman with a gentle smile and soft hands that smelled faintly of lavender. Her father, Alessandro, had insisted on hiring the maid personally, choosing someone who seemed capable, trustworthy, and attentive. Celestina had taken an immediate liking to her, whispering secrets and small fears that no one else could know. Yet, even in those early days, a subtle tension threaded through Marietta's careful smiles and polite nods, a quiet vigilance that had always hinted at something lurking beneath. Alessandro had noticed it too, initially dismissing it as dedication, yet over time, small inconsistencies began to gnaw at his confidence. Misplaced objects, hurried explanations, an unexplained hesitation whenever he discussed his daughter's future. Alessandro's office overlooked the sprawling gardens, a fortress of glass and steel where he often retreated to plan, calculate, and anticipate threats. His mind wandered back to the months before that night, to the subtle cracks forming in the facade of trust. Marietta had arrived with glowing references and a pristine record, yet Alessandro's instincts, honed over years of navigating the treacherous world of organized crime, warned him that appearances often lied. He had started observing her more carefully, noting how she lingered just a fraction too long near Celestina's possessions, how her gaze followed the girl with a quiet intensity that did not belong to mere caretaking. Alessandro remembered one afternoon when Marietta had insisted on walking Celestina through the estate's labyrinthine gardens. The girl had run ahead, carefree, yet Marietta's hand had gripped hers a little too tightly, her thumb brushing against Celestina's wrist in a gesture that felt possessive rather than protective. Meanwhile, Celestina's own innocence masked a perceptive intelligence that Alessandro both admired and feared. She noticed the smallest details, a slightly ajar drawer, a whispered conversation, a sudden hesitation. The child had begun piecing together subtle patterns long before anyone realized, storing memories like puzzle pieces for a future she could not yet name. Marietta's influence, while outwardly nurturing, carried undertones that Alessandro struggled to interpret. Was it love or manipulation? Devotion or strategy? Each day added layers of ambiguity, small inconsistencies that multiplied into questions without answers. Alessandro's nights became restless, haunted by the subtle awareness that something, some hidden intention, was threading itself between his daughter and the safety he promised her. He had always taught Celestina that appearances could deceive, that the world outside their walls was full of hidden threats, yet he never imagined betrayal could hide within the walls themselves. Marietta, on the other hand, had her own story, a past marked by survival, cunning, and a hunger for protection that sometimes blurred lines between loyalty and ambition. She had grown up in the shadow of poverty and loss, her life defined by careful observation and silent strategy. When Alessandro had offered her the position, she had seen it as both opportunity and trap, a chance to secure a place in a world that had always felt just out of reach. Her careful gestures, her whispered reassurances to Celestina, were part instinct, part habit, part something deeper she rarely allowed herself to name. To the young girl, she was a protector and a friend, but in her heart, Marietta's eyes always scanned for threats, always calculated the next move. Even now she carried the satchel with unspoken intent, a secret that had grown from years of patience and planning, waiting for the exact moment when action could no longer be delayed. And yet, in the quiet corners of the estate, Alessandro had moments of doubt and hope intertwined. He recalled watching Marietta teach Celestina how to read, how to garden, how to speak softly to birds in the morning sunlight. The warmth of those memories contrasted sharply with the tension that had now escalated to life-or-death stakes. Alessandro's love for his daughter was absolute, a force that demanded vigilance and control, yet also left him painfully aware of how fragile safety could be. He could see, even in the gentle interactions of the past, the first threads of deception forming like cracks in ice. Every gesture, every careful smile, every protective hug carried potential dual meanings. Alessandro knew that understanding Marietta's true intentions required patience, observation, and perhaps sacrifice. Yet deep inside, he also recognized a dangerous truth. His daughter's trust, once placed, could never be withdrawn without consequences that would ripple far beyond the walls of their home. The estate lay quiet under a pale morning sky, but the calm was an illusion. Alessandro's mind raced with what he had seen the previous night, the memory of Marietta's movements replaying with painful clarity. He could not shake the image of her leaning over Celestina, the whispered words that sounded at once tender and threatening. Every instinct in him screamed that the balance of control had shifted. The walls of trust he had built around his daughter's world were cracking. He moved through the grand halls, his polished shoes silent against marble, eyes sweeping each corner for signs of intrusion or hidden plans. Even the familiar scent of polished wood and roses no longer reassured him. The house felt alien, a place where shadows might hide intent and silence could carry betrayal. Alessandro's mind traced the past. In analyzing every interaction, every word Marietta had spoken over the months, trying to find the point where loyalty had slipped into secrecy, where devotion had given way to manipulation. Celestina, unaware of the storm brewing in her father's mind, wandered into the garden, her small hands trailing over dew-laden petals. She had sensed a subtle change in Marietta's behavior the day before, small hesitations in her speech, the lingering glances toward the estate's outer walls. The child's intuition, sharpened by a life of careful observation, whispered that something was different. She loved Marietta, yet a flicker of doubt had begun to seed itself in her heart, a quiet question she dared not speak aloud. Her father's absence on the fabricated Milan trip had left her feeling unmoored, relying on Marietta for guidance, yet sensing that guidance was laced with hidden intentions. The interplay between trust and fear, innocence and understanding, created a tension that the garden's sunlight could not dispel. Each movement of the leaves, each bird's call, seemed to echo the unspoken questions that hovered in the air. Meanwhile, Alessandro summoned his most trusted allies, men and women whose loyalty had been tested over decades of survival in a world where betrayal could kill. He did not speak of Marietta directly, for the conversation needed subtlety, nor did he reveal the depth of his fear. Instead, he asked pointed questions about security, about routines, about small cracks in household order that could hint at mischief. His team's faces were stone, reading nothing but obeying everything. Each answer, each nod fed Alessandro's calculations, yet none could fully capture the treacherous possibility that someone from inside his inner circle, someone he had trusted with his daughter, might already have made plans beyond his control. His pulse thumped in measured rhythm, every beat a reminder of how fragile power, trust, and loyalty truly were. The stakes had shifted, and he realized with cold clarity that the world outside the estate was far less dangerous than the secrets now hiding inside it. Marietta, in her quarters, moved with quiet efficiency, aware of Alessandro's scrutiny, yet undeterred. Her mind mapped possibilities, tracing paths that led to safety for the child she had come to care for in her own complex way. Every item she packed into the satchel, every whispered plan she rehearsed in silence, carried a dual purpose: protect Celestina and maintain her own shield against the man whose presence dominated every corner of their lives. She paused to glance at a framed photograph on her dresser, a younger Alessandro holding Celestina, both smiling innocently, unaware of the slow unraveling of their world. Marietta's lips pressed into a thin line. She had no desire to harm the child, yet the world she had grown up in taught her that control was survival, and survival sometimes required choices that appeared cruel to those who had never walked the path. The line between love and strategy blurred in her heart, creating an unsteady tension she could neither dismiss nor fully embrace. As the day drew on, tension thickened like storm clouds over the estate. Alessandro watched, calculated, and waited, while Marietta prepared, planned, and maneuvered. Celestina, caught between the two, sensed the invisible threads pulling tight around her world. The first crack in the fortress of trust had appeared, and the ripples were spreading faster than anyone could predict. Each glance, each pause, each quiet word carried weight, threatening to ignite the simmering storm. Alessandro's realization deepened. This was no longer a game of observation, no longer a test of loyalty. It was a quiet battle of wills, a contest of perception, strategy, and emotional stakes that could determine the fate of the people he loved most. And as shadows lengthened across the estate, one undeniable truth became impossible to ignore. The night would not end without revelation, and the revelation could shatter everything. The estate felt colder that evening, the sunset casting long, the blood-orange streaks across marble floors and velvet drapes. Alessandro retreated to his private study, a sanctum of leather-bound books and polished steel, but even here he could not escape the gnawing sense of betrayal. Memories flickered unbidden: Marietta's first days as a maid, her quiet efficiency, the way she anticipated every need of his daughter before he even voiced it. At the time, he had been grateful, even impressed. But now those same gestures seemed like rehearsed moves in a game only she understood. Alessandro's mind raced over every detail: the way she arranged Celestina's toys, the meticulous cleaning of her room, the soft lullabies sung when the child awoke frightened at night. Each act, once a mark of devotion, now carried the shadow of potential manipulation. He clenched his jaw, a low hum of anger vibrating through him. Trust, he realized, was fragile, and sometimes deadly. Meanwhile, in a small kitchen at the edge of the estate, Marietta moved with the calm precision of someone long accustomed to hiding urgency beneath serenity. She carefully prepared Celestina's dinner, arranging the table with gentle attention. The child sat quietly, watching, sensing the subtle tension, yet not fully understanding it. Marietta's past had taught her that people often underestimated the quiet ones, the servants, the observers who waited patiently for the right moment. Her own life had been shaped by deception, survival, and the knowledge that innocence could be weaponized as easily as it could be protected. As she slid the last plate onto the table, her mind raced through contingency plans, in imagining Alessandro's inevitable discovery, each scenario more dangerous than the last. And yet, beneath her careful calculation, a strange warmth bloomed, a protective instinct toward Celestina that sometimes clashed with her own long-honed strategies. Celestina sensed the undercurrent of tension, even as she focused on her food. Her childlike curiosity had grown sharper over the months, and she noticed the way Marietta's eyes lingered on the door, on the corridors, on every shadow. The girl understood in some primal way that something was changing, that the safe world she had known was fracturing. She longed for her father's presence, his reassuring voice and calm authority, yet part of her also felt a magnetic pull toward Marietta, whose guidance had shaped much of her young life. The duality of trust, between father and maid, protection and secrecy, created a fragile web that might not withstand the pressure building in the house. Celestina's small fingers twisted her napkin as she imagined the possibilities, A sudden departure, a secret meeting, an unexplained journey. Her heart pounded with anticipation and fear, a mixture that mirrored the storm growing outside the estate walls. Back in the study, Alessandro's thoughts returned to the early warnings he had brushed off. Minor inconsistencies in Marietta's stories, fleeting expressions of irritation when questioned, the occasional hesitation when discussing his daughter's activities, all of these now carried significance he could no longer ignore. He remembered the look in her eyes during one quiet afternoon in the library, a gaze that seemed to measure his patience, his reactions, his limits. Could he have misjudged her all along? Or was this the beginning of a betrayal so carefully constructed that even his instincts had failed to detect it until now? Alessandro's chest tightened with the realization that the answers could only come at great risk. Observation was no longer sufficient. Action would be required. Yet even as he formulated his plan, he knew that the line between confrontation and catastrophe was razor-thin, and any misstep could endanger the one person he could never afford to lose, Celestina. As the sky darkened into a deep violet, the mansion seemed to inhale with tension, holding its secrets close. Marietta paused in the hallway, listening to the faint echo of footsteps in the marble corridors, a rhythm she had learned to interpret over years of vigilance. Celestina's quiet breathing in the adjacent room reminded her of what truly mattered, yet she also knew that every second now carried consequence. Alessandro's presence, whether seen or unseen, loomed over every action, and the choices she made in the coming hours would define the future. The shadows of trust, loyalty, and hidden intent stretched long across the estate, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. And as the first stars pierced the night sky, the fragile equilibrium that had sustained them all began to shift, setting the stage for revelations that could change everything. Night had fallen like a velvet curtain over the Vercetti estate, wrapping the gardens, corridors, and towers in shadow. Alessandro moved silently through the house, the faint scent of polished wood and Marietta's lingering lavender reminding him of what was at stake. Each room he passed held memories, moments of laughter, lessons with Celestina, whispered advice. But tonight, even those spaces felt alien. His instincts screamed danger, a betrayal too carefully orchestrated to be accidental. Every step, every flicker of movement in the corner of his eye heightened his awareness. He reached the library, pausing to consider the possibilities. Had Marietta truly intended to harm or merely manipulate? Could a single misstep undo months of trust and vigilance? The air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, awaiting for him to act. Alessandro's pulse surged, a mixture of dread and determination coursing through his veins. In the nursery, Celestina tugged at her blanket, eyes wide as she whispered into the dark. Something about the night unsettled her, a sound she couldn't identify, a movement too subtle to name. Marietta hovered nearby, pretending calm while scanning the corridors through a narrow slit in the door. Her hand rested lightly on the satchel at her side, the small bag now packed with intent. Every muscle in her body was poised, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. She had rehearsed scenarios in silence, calculating the exact timing needed to achieve her goal. Protect Celestina from dangers Alessandro could not foresee, even if it meant walking the fine line of defiance. Her duality, nurturer and strategist, pulled her in conflicting directions, yet she had learned long ago that hesitation could cost everything. Alessandro's mind traced back to the warning signs he had ignored, the subtle hesitation in Marietta's voice when he discussed his daughter's outings, the faint smirk that sometimes lingered at the corners of her lips, the way she had memorized his routines as if anticipating his every move. Tonight, the pieces were aligning into a picture too sharp to dismiss. His instincts, finely honed from years in a world where betrayal was as common as air, screamed that action was necessary. Every second he delayed increased the risk. Yet patience remained his weapon. Observe first, act with precision. A wrong move could turn protective vigilance into tragedy. He adjusted his gloves, in feeling the leather tighten across his palms and let his gaze sweep across the dimly lit corridors, waiting for a misstep from the one person he thought he could trust. Outside, the gardens whispered with the breeze, leaves rustling softly against the night's stillness. Celestina, curiosity mingling with fear, peered through a half-open window, catching glimpses of Marietta's movements. She wondered what the satchel contained, why her heart raced despite being safely indoors, and why the usual warmth of her maid's presence now carried shadows. The child's intuition, subtle yet insistent, warned her that tonight was different. The interplay between her father's watchful protection and Marietta's careful secrecy created a tension she could not name, a storm swirling in invisible currents. Every shadow seemed to conceal a secret. Every whisper of wind carried possibility. Celestina's innocence heightened the stakes, her small awareness making the night a delicate balance of protection and danger. And then, without warning, a soft metallic click echoed through the halls, the kind that immediately sets the spine on edge. Marietta froze, eyes narrowing as her body shifted, poised to move. Alessandro, hidden in the shadows, caught the sound and felt his chest tighten. The moment had arrived. The threads of secrecy, loyalty, and deception were tightening toward a breaking point. Every plan, every instinct, and every fear coalesced into one singular thought: this night would define the future. And as Marietta's hand hovered near the satchel, ready to move, and Celestina watched, uncomprehending yet alert, Alessandro realized that patience had given way to inevitability. The quiet game of observation and calculation was ending, and the confrontation he had both dreaded and anticipated was about to begin. The grand hall of the Vercetti estate lay cloaked in shadows, moonlight streaming through the tall windows, painting silver stripes across the polished marble. Alessandro stood hidden behind a column, his breath measured, his gaze fixed on Marietta as she moved toward the study door. Every gesture was deliberate, every step a quiet declaration of intent. He could see the satchel in her hand, the weight of secrets pressing against her body like a second skin. His mind raced, calculating, anticipating. For months he had observed her, piecing together subtle inconsistencies into patterns that now seemed undeniable. Marietta, who had once seemed the embodiment of loyalty, now walked the line between protection and betrayal. Alessandro's instincts screamed danger, yet he remained silent, allowing the tension to build, the room itself seeming to hold its breath. Celestina crouched near the base of the staircase, unseen, her small frame trembling as she watched the shadowed figures of both her protector and her father. She felt the electricity of the moment in her chest, an awareness that something monumental was unfolding, though she did not fully understand it. The satchel, the whispered instructions, the quiet footfalls, each element spoke to a story she could sense but not yet comprehend. Her heart thumped in her small chest, a mix of fear, anticipation, and curiosity. Every instinct she possessed screamed to intervene, to warn Marietta or call for her father, yet she remained frozen, caught in the gravitational pull of the adult conflict unfolding before her. Marietta paused mid-step, her hand resting on the satchel's strap. She sensed, without looking, the presence of Alessandro somewhere behind her, the weight of his attention pressing down invisibly. Her mind raced through contingencies, calculating every possible reaction, every twist of fate that could protect Celestina without revealing her intentions. Years of survival instincts surged forward, blending with genuine affection for the child she had grown to care for. The balance between deception and devotion was delicate, each step a negotiation between risk and necessity. She took a breath, steadying herself, knowing that the next few moments could determine everything: loyalty, trust, and the future of the little girl she had promised to safeguard. Alessandro finally stepped forward, the sound of his polished shoes echoing faintly across the marble. Marietta's eyes flicked toward him, her body tensing instinctively, yet her face remained calm, unreadable. The silence between them was thick, a charged atmosphere where a single word could ignite disaster. Alessandro's voice, low and controlled, cut through the tension. "Marietta, explain." The word carried authority, dread, and the weight of a man who had devoted his life to controlling every outcome. Marietta's hand tightened slightly on the satchel, her response measured, carefully chosen. "I only wish to protect her, sir," she said, her tone calm but resolute. "Every action I take is for Celestina." The words were true, yet incomplete, leaving the space between them electric with unspoken intent. The stillness cracked like glass when Alessandro's eyes narrowed, the storm of emotion barely contained. His mind catalogued the months of subtle betrayal, the inconsistencies, the hidden gestures, and the whispered reassurances that had always carried a hidden undertone. He realized that trust was no longer possible, not until motives were laid bare, not until intentions were fully revealed. Marietta's gaze met his, unwavering, revealing only fragments of the truth she had carefully protected. Celestina watched from the shadows, her small hands gripping the banister, understanding more than she should, yet still too young to act. The tension spiraled, every second stretching as the two adults faced each other, silent but fully aware of the stakes: loyalty, love, and the safety of the child they both cherished. And as the moonlight traced lines across the satchel between them, one undeniable truth became clear. Tonight, the fragile balance of trust would either shatter or solidify, and nothing would ever be the same. The night air pressed heavy against the walls of the Vercetti estate, a suffocating cloak that made every shadow seem alive. Alessandro's gaze bore into Marietta, reading the slight twitch of her wrist, the faint tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes held a story she had not yet revealed. Every second stretched, each heartbeat loud in the otherwise silent hall. The satchel rested heavily at her side, a symbol of the unspoken plans that had brought them to this dangerous equilibrium. Alessandro's patience had frayed. Months of suspicion, observation, and subtle tests had led to this confrontation. His voice, when it finally cut the air, was sharper. "Marietta, you need to tell me what's really going on. Now." The words carried both command and an undercurrent of fear, the kind that only a father who loves too fiercely can feel. Marietta's eyes softened slightly as they flicked toward Celestina, who crouched near the staircase, small and wide-eyed. Her heart ached for the child, who had no understanding of the danger that swirled around her. Every protective instinct she had cultivated collided with the awareness of Alessandro's scrutiny. She opened the satchel just enough for Alessandro to glimpse its contents: carefully folded clothes, a small bundle of food, a medical kit, proof of careful planning, yet revealing nothing of her true intention. "I swear," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly despite her control, "everything I've done is to keep her safe. I would never harm her." The sincerity in her tone battled with the tension in Alessandro's chest, creating a friction that made the room almost vibrate with suspense. Celestina, sensing the gravity of the moment, inched closer to the edge of the staircase. She wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but the adult's energy froze her words before they could escape. Her small hands clenched the banister, knuckles white with tension. She had always trusted Marietta, yet tonight something in the air felt dangerous, unfamiliar, like the calm before a storm she could neither see nor predict. Her father's stern presence, Marietta's measured movements, the shadowed hallways, they all combined into a web she could feel tightening around her. Each subtle gesture, every glance, carried weight. The room's silence was punctuated by the sound of her own rapid heartbeat, echoing the escalating conflict between the two people who shaped her world. Alessandro's mind raced through possibilities, weighing intentions against outcomes. Could Marietta be acting out of fear, misguided loyalty, or something darker? Years in the underworld had taught him that deception was layered, motivations hidden beneath masks that were impossible to read at a glance. Yet, as he looked at the satchel, at the careful arrangement of its contents, he glimpsed a fragment of truth. Protection, not malice, guided her actions. Still, the uncertainty gnawed at him. The question was no longer whether she would harm Celestina. He did not believe she would, but whether her choices would put the child at risk in ways he could not yet see. The tension became almost unbearable, a tight coil that threatened to snap at any moment. Finally, the silence fractured as Alessandro stepped fully into view, voice steadier now but edged with vulnerability. If your intentions are pure," he said, "then show me, clearly. Don't hide anything. Not from me, not from her." Marietta's chest rose and fell with a quiet sigh, and in that moment, their unspoken battle shifted. She nodded once, decisively, and the weight of secrecy seemed to lift just enough for trust to flicker between them. Celestina, sensing the subtle change, relaxed slightly, though the tension remained like a quiet drumbeat. Outside, the night seemed to respond. The wind stirred, leaves rustled, and the world held its breath. The storm had begun to break, but its full force was yet to come, a force that would test loyalty, love, and courage in ways none of them could anticipate. The mansion felt alive with tension, every corridor a silent witness to the storm unfolding within. Alessandro paced the grand hall, his sharp gaze never leaving Marietta, who stood near the staircase, her hand still lightly gripping the satchel. The shadows cast by the chandeliers danced across her face, emphasizing the subtle strength and fear entwined in her posture. He had trusted few people in his life, yet she had held a special place. Until tonight. Each calculated step she took seemed to challenge him silently, daring him to act while keeping Celestina safe. Alessandro's mind raced, torn between protective fury and cautious observation. One wrong move could shatter everything. One misjudged gesture could risk the only person in the world he truly loved. The night, heavy and suffocating, amplified every heartbeat, every faint sound of the house settling, as if the estate itself was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Celestina crouched nearby, and her small body pressed against the polished wood banister, eyes wide and unblinking. She could sense the unspoken tension between her father and Marietta, a pressure that made the room vibrate invisibly. Fear and curiosity warred inside her, a cocktail that made her pulse thrum painfully in her chest. Her mind tried to make sense of what she had glimpsed, the satchel, the whispered promises, the lingering glances, but the adult world was full of subtleties she could not yet parse. Despite her uncertainty, a strange determination rose within her. She could not remain entirely passive. Even a child's small intuition, untrained yet sharp, understood that this night was pivotal. Every second carried consequence. Every movement could tip the fragile balance between safety and disaster. Marietta, sensing the shift, finally spoke, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "Alessandro, you must trust me. If only for her sake," she said, her eyes flicking toward Celestina. "I have planned every step to protect her. I would never allow harm to come to her while I have the power to prevent it." Alessandro's jaw tightened. He could see sincerity etched in her features, yet instinct screamed that hidden danger could still be lurking in the smallest gestures. His years in the underworld had taught him to question everything, to dissect truth from appearance. Still, as he studied the careful organization of the satchel, the deliberate calm in her tone, he realized the undeniable. Her loyalty had been tested, and while unconventional, her protective instincts were real. Suddenly, a sharp sound shattered the tense quiet, a door slamming somewhere in the upper wing. "I'm echoing like a gunshot." Alessandro reacted instinctively, spinning toward the sound, eyes blazing, muscles coiled. Marietta shifted immediately, moving to shield Celestina, positioning her body between father and daughter, a living barrier of protection. The child gasped softly, heart pounding as the danger she barely understood became tangible. Every instinct in Alessandro's body screamed to act, yet he hesitated, recognizing the calculated courage in Marietta's stance. The storm had erupted, and the fragile truce that had allowed them all to exist in uneasy balance was gone. Now every move would have consequences, and the night had only just begun. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling shutters and sending shadows flickering across the walls. The estate, once a haven, now felt like a cage of invisible threats, each corner concealing unknown intentions. Alessandro and Marietta stood in silent confrontation, a tension so thick it seemed to press against the very air. Celestina watched, torn between fear and fascination, as the two most important figures in her life navigated a delicate battle of trust, authority, and love. The night's reckoning had arrived, and nothing would be the same when the first true revelation broke through the shadows. The storm was not merely outside, it was in their hearts, their minds, their decisions, and the fate of the child they both cherished hung in the balance, trembling like a candle in a gusting wind. The grand hall trembled under the weight of silence, as if the walls themselves anticipated the storm about to erupt. Alessandro's eyes locked on Marietta, sharp and calculating. A man who had spent years navigating danger now confronted with a betrayal that could shatter everything he held dear. The satchel at her side glimmered under the moonlight, its contents innocent yet loaded with intent, a symbol of her carefully hidden plan. Every instinct screamed caution, every heartbeat thundered in his chest. The years of trust he had placed in her clashed violently with the suspicion that had built like a coiled spring. And at the center of this tension stood Celestina, small and fragile, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and hope, unaware of the intricate web of decisions and secrets that enveloped her world. Marietta's hand rested lightly on the satchel, a gesture at once protective and resolute. She met Alessandro's gaze without flinching, revealing both courage and the weight of her love for the child. Her voice was steady, but carried the subtle tremor of anticipation. "Everything I have done, Alessandro, I did for her," she said, gesturing toward Celestina. "I would rather face your wrath than see her harmed by a world she cannot yet understand." Alessandro's jaw tightened, anger, fear, and something deeper, a reluctant respect, fighting within him. For months, he had tested, observed, and doubted. Now, the full measure of her intent was laid bare, forcing him to confront a truth he had been unwilling to accept. Marietta's loyalty had been proven, but her methods defied every rule he had ever lived by. Celestina, sensing the energy crackling around her, inched forward, hands clutched at her chest. She had learned enough from observation, enough from whispered lessons to feel the life-or-death stakes. Her father's eyes, sharp and commanding, met Marietta's steady, deliberate stare, and in that instant, she understood that both adults were fighting for her in ways that words could not capture. The tension stretched across the room like a taut wire, every breath and movement loaded with consequence. Even the chandeliers above seemed to tremble with anticipation, casting fractured shadows that mirrored the storm of emotions below. A single mistake could unravel everything. A single misstep could change the course of their lives forever. Suddenly, a distant crash echoed through the upper wing of the mansion, a window thrown open, a curtain flung violently. Celestina cried out softly, and Alessandro moved instantly, stepping between Marietta and the unknown threat. Marietta's hand instinctively reached for the satchel, her body poised to shield the child at all costs. The world outside seemed to intrude violently upon the carefully measured space of the hall, yet the true battle was not external. It was between intent and perception, trust and fear, loyalty and suspicion. Each second stretched unbearably long, the rhythm of hearts and breaths sinking in a tense, silent symphony that could only end with revelation. And then, as the wind howled through the open window and the moonlight illuminated every expression, Alessandro's chest tightened with understanding. He saw Marietta's careful, deliberate actions, the satchel, the protective positioning, the unwavering gaze, and realized the truth he had been unwilling to admit. She had never intended harm. Every gesture, every plan, every whispered promise had been designed to protect Celestina, to safeguard the life he treasured above all else. The tension that had gripped the room since his return shattered like glass. Relief, Anger and awe collided in his chest, and in that instant, the fragile web of fear and suspicion gave way to clarity. The night, once suffocating with uncertainty, now brimmed with the promise of resolution. But the consequences of the choices made in shadows would echo forever, reshaping trust, loyalty, and love in ways none of them could have predicted. The first light of dawn filtered through the tall windows of the Vercetti estate, painting the grand hall in soft gold, and the storm of the previous night seemed to have passed, leaving behind a fragile calm. Alessandro stood near the staircase, his gaze softened but still sharp, reflecting the weight of the revelations he had faced. Marietta, satchel now empty but purposefully placed aside, remained by Celestina's side, her posture protective yet relaxed. For the first time in months, Alessandro allowed himself to exhale fully. The truth had been laid bare. Every careful step, every whispered plan, every action taken in the shadows had been designed not to deceive, but to protect. The tension that had gripped the house had finally broken, replaced by a cautious, hard-earned trust. Celestina ran into Alessandro's arms, her small hands clutching at his suit as tears of relief glimmered in her eyes. "Papa," she whispered, voice trembling. Alessandro held her tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility and the depth of love that had guided him through every fear-filled moment. Marietta watched quietly, a faint smile softening her usually guarded expression. She had fulfilled her promise, safeguarding the child she had grown to love in her own complex way, and now the bonds between them, father, daughter, protector, were stronger for the trials endured. The air seemed lighter, filled with the scent of roses and polished wood, carrying the warmth of a household rebalanced. Alessandro turned to Marietta, his eyes steady. "You risked everything to protect her," he said, voice edged with gratitude and lingering authority. "I misjudged you." Marietta's shoulders relaxed, the tension leaving her in waves. "I only wanted her safe," she replied softly. The words hung in the sunlight, honest and clear. Alessandro nodded, understanding that loyalty could take forms he had never expected, that love could exist even in unconventional methods. Trust, he realized, was not about perfection, but about the courage to act when stakes were highest, even when unseen. Celestina tugged gently at Marietta's sleeve. "Will you stay with us?" she asked, eyes wide with hope. Marietta knelt beside her, brushing back a strand of hair. "Always," she whispered. The three of them, father, daughter, and protector, stood together in the quiet hall, a fragile but unbreakable triangle forged through fear, courage, and love. Alessandro felt a weight lift from his chest, replaced by a newfound clarity. Their world was dangerous, unpredictable, and imperfect, but it was theirs. They had endured shadows, tested loyalty, and emerged stronger, bound by bonds that would not easily fracture. As the sun climbed higher, spilling light across the estate's gardens and marble floors, Alessandro, Celestina, and Marietta stepped toward a new day. The night's storms had left their mark, but they had survived, each scar a testament to resilience and trust. Alessandro knew the world beyond the estate remained dangerous, full of betrayal and uncertainty. Yet in this moment, he understood that protection, love, and courage could withstand even the darkest shadows. Celestina's laughter broke through the quiet, a sound full of life and hope, and Marietta's calm presence radiated reassurance. Alessandro allowed himself a small smile, realizing that in the collision of shadows, they had found clarity, loyalty, and a bond that would endure beyond fear, beyond secrets. And beyond the night that had tested them all. That's it for today's story. Like, share, and subscribe if you want more twists, suspense, and romance. Comment below the moment that shocked you the most. Your opinion could be featured in the next video. Stay tuned. The next story is coming, and it's going to be unforgettable.